Hello and welcome to the Allplane podcast. As always, exploring the commercial aviation industry in the company of expert professionals. But first of all, quick reminder that you can find this and all the preceding episodes of the Allplane podcast with interesting stories about airlines and aviation on our website, Allplane.tv. This is ALLPLANE.tv. Important, it's .tv, not .com. Today we are going to have a look at a super essential function in the aviation world, but one that happens mostly behind the scenes. I'm talking about aviation fuel. Obviously, and until new means of propulsion become feasible, if there is no fuel, there is no flight. This is quite a specialized area, and one that I must confess I knew very little about. This is why I have invited not one, but two guests to come on the pod today and talk about this topic. Daniel Chereau is Assistant Director, Commercial Fuel at IATA, the International Air Transport Association, and Yulia Dianova is the head of the International Sales Division at Gazpromneft-aero, a leading aviation fuel provider based in Russia, but with operations worldwide. Besides giving us an overview about how the aviation fuel market works, we will also talk with Daniel and Yulia about another area of innovation in this segment, and that is the development of digital means to optimize the whole fueling process. Just as IATA has been pushing for some new standards for ticket distribution, like NDC, that we had the chance to discuss here on the podcast on episode number 14, check it out. This international organization is promoting as well new technological standards in the fuel industry. These new standards facilitate the exchange of information between all the different parties involved in the fueling process, the airlines, fuel suppliers, people on the ground manning the fuel trucks, etc. Surprisingly, this is an area that until now had few common standards, and this resulted often in too much complexity. Now this is being sorted out by technology. And Gazpromneft-aero, for example, and this is why we have here Yulia today, is an early adopter of this IATA's fuel standards technology. So we're going to hear from Yulia and Daniel, but what all this means in practice. I hope this episode helps shed some light on this very essential aspect of the aviation industry. And without further ado, let me welcome our guests today. Hello, Daniel and Yulia. How are you?
Hello, good.
Yeah, hi, Mikel. Very good, thank you very much.
So you are in two different locations, right? Yulia, you are in Moscow?
No, I'm in St. Petersburg, in Russia, but in St. Petersburg, yeah.
Okay, and you, Daniel?
I'm in Geneva, in Switzerland.
Geneva, okay.
Yeah.
So we've got a multinational call here. Very good. So we are going to talk about aviation fuel, which is a very important topic because with no fuel, there's no flying, of course. We are going to try to understand a bit better how this market works with two experts from IATA, from the fuel team at IATA, and from Gazpromneft-aero, which is a Russian supplier of aviation fuel. It's a very important player in this market. And first of all, I would suggest we go to the basics. Well, actually, let me put it this way. Maybe better if you start introducing what you guys do, each of you. Yeah, so who starts? Daniel, you start?
Right. So, aviation fuel is a quite complex issue, and within IATA, there's actually three departments that currently deal with fuel. So there's one which is technical fuel department. There's one that's dealing with SAF, sustainable aviation fuels. And then there's our department, and we do commercial matters. So everything that has to do with efficiencies, transparency, competition, government relations, and such. So we do that part. So it's quite complex. And usually lots of people involved both in the supplier side and also from the airlines.
And also from IATA, you are also pushing a number of technology initiatives as well. Right?
Exactly. And I think that's the main purpose of this call is to discuss those, right? So how digitalization can support bringing improvements and efficiencies to the airlines and also suppliers. I think this is something that benefits all stakeholders involved.
Yes, actually, yeah, that's one of the topics we're going to discuss because, like every other aspect of the aviation industry, the fuel segment is also undergoing an accelerated digitalization. And I think Yulia from Gazpromneft, you're going to explain us as well a little bit your experience in this area. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your role?
Yes, first of all, Mikhail, thank you very much for inviting me to this podcast. Very interesting podcast, I should say. So I'm here from the supplier side, from Gazpromneft-aero, which is a leading supplier in Russia, fuel supplier. Here we have domestic market, and I work mostly for international sales market with the international airlines, and we also have our business outside of Russia in the international airports with direct stakeholders there, with the direct suppliers, native national suppliers in different parts of the world. So I also come into the IATA Fuel Data Standards Group, FDSG group, where we are discussing digital standards, which we are going to discuss today at the podcast.
Yes. First of all, before we move into discussing the specific technologies that you guys have been working on, I would like to start with a bit of an introduction about how the world of aviation fuel works, because many people in aviation, including myself, we are not experts in aviation fuel. This is a very, very specialized area, but it's very important. I mean, when you see any financial report of any airline, always fuel is a very, very, very important part of the cost structure, of the profitability. It has a massive impact on how this industry works. It's a very technical area, so not many people are aware of everything that's going on behind the scenes. So that's why today we are trying to shed some light here into this area and try to understand a bit who are the players here. Let's start by how is the aviation fuel market structure? On one side, you have, I guess, the refining companies, the fuel producers like Gazpromneft-aero. Obviously, there's a logistics that bring this distribution, the fuel to the different supply points. Then at the airport, I guess there's also the companies that physically supply the fuel to the aircraft, which I don't know if are the same ones that are also producing the fuel. I don't know how vertically integrated this market is. And then obviously there is a whole process and we're going to touch this later because that's one of the areas where digitalization is happening. There's a whole process to control this flow and to a whole paper trail of contracts and counterparties involved in all this process. Can you tell us, I don't know if Daniel, Yulia, who would like to answer this one, but how is this market structure? I mean, from the refinery all the way to the plane.
I can start, I guess, because all these processes that Mikhail, you just mentioned, these belong to the vertical integrated company, like the company I come from. So we have, starting from the refinery, we take the product to the fueling farms where we put it into the airline's tank. So we cover all these processes together with the sales. And basically, you can just divide the process of fuel supply into technical and commercial. So the technical part in the airport, it consists of the preparation and the fuel supply part. So the preparation part is really very important because it covers the organization of technical equipment, following the technical standards, the international fuel standards like IATA, FTP standards, and it is there is a very strict quality control on each and every stage of fuel supply, from the reservoirs to the fuel tanks, from the fuel tanks into the airplane tank. So basically there is a quality control, very strict, because you should take a very good care of the aviation fuel, because you cannot do the off-specification fuel because it would lead to very bad results. Then that's why if we speak about the preparational part, it is one of the most important parts of the fuel supply process. And the whole process, if we speak about the airline, and we know that the airline on the apron of the airport is the whole process looks like a pit stop on the Formula Racing Cup. So all the processes should be very fast, and all the minutes are already calculated. So you cannot just do nothing on the apron. You should be involved into the process. So each and every second costs money, and that's why we have to be very fast there.
Mm-hmm.
So and
so you provide
Mhm.
the whole process. So you produce, you refine, you distribute, and you all the way up to the apron when the plane arrives, and you as a company, you also supply physically the aircraft.
Yeah, we do have our fueling farms, so fueling in the airports, and we take a very good care of those fueling farms, and we do follow the international standards of the quality control on each and every stage, and that's why we are involved. We have been been IATA strategic partner since 2008, and frankly speaking, we have started our business in 2007, and we took a course for international business, and that's why we decided that we should enter international association like IATA, which covers all the parts of fuel supply and the parts of airlines life. So that's why we follow the standards that IATA produces, and in some of those we take some part as well as like experts. So we have the commercial part as well, and we work with the different type of airlines, like cargo airlines, passenger airlines, and domestic and international. And with all those airlines, we have like very up-to-date commercial partnership. We work on different price bases, and we have the International Stock Exchange formula prices with the international airlines. So all the work of our company, it follows the international standards. That's what I wanted to highlight, and which is really important to speak one language with the airlines and our partners.
Because you obviously Russia, I guess, is your main market, but you have operations in other countries as well. So you can supply the fuel to airlines in different points, in different airports across where, in Europe?
Yes.
Or?
This is another commercial part of our business. It's an international business where I work in. So it's very interesting because being in Russia, we can supply to the Russian airlines, mostly most of our clients outside of Russia, anywhere they want. So we have a direct contract with our partners outside of Russia, and we have we can actually have refueling of their clients in Russia, and we can supply fuel in the airports where our partners are represented. So this is an interesting part of our business, which helps us to understand the world's market better.
Because I have one question here. Are the airlines normally working with just one supplier with a long-term relationship, or one airline might be working with different suppliers depending on the airport, for example? So how exclusive is this relationship between the airlines and the fuel provider?
So it varies. I mean, the aviation is truly an international business. So I think Yulia's answer mainly focused on the Russian market is one vision. The airlines, and it also depends a lot and varies from airline to airline depending size and size and other things, right? I mean, usually airlines for the most part are price takers, such as when you go and refuel your car at the gas station. And then there's a minor part that you would negotiate with your fuel supplier. That's usually what an airline would do for the largest part of their network. But some of them have gone into self-supply at some points. You have cases where airlines have actually bought refineries.
Yeah, Delta.
Others, well, yeah, and then others who manage ships and are very integrated supply chain, right?
Yeah.
So you have varying degrees of involvement throughout the supply chain, and also you would have. I would doubt that there is any single fuel supplier that's present all over the world. Some of them, mainly resellers, have a quite large footprint. But if you are a global airline, you will very likely go and have many different suppliers. And that doesn't only mean suppliers such as Gazprom, who is vertically integrated. You may have actual fuel suppliers who are different depending on airport to airport. If you're an airline and you operate in your own hub, buying from suppliers, you may want to have more than one even, right? Just to diversify and make sure that you will have constant streams of fuel coming from different directions and different suppliers and different, supply chains, basically.
Yeah.
But then there's also people who handle the fuel facilities. There's into-plane service providers, there's IT service providers. So it's a very complex environment, and I think a very interesting business. And that actually what it makes is that the fuel community is quite tight, I would say. So we have the Aviation Fuel Forum in IATA, which is attended by like 800 people. And usually you see the same faces all the time, because usually what happens is you start as a fuel buyer in an airline, and then you become like a fuel salesperson and such. Yeah. So it's an interesting world, but quite complex.
So yeah, I actually wanted to ask you about the ecosystem, because there are, of course, the large integrated companies, vertically integrated companies like Gazpromneft. But I guess there are also some stages of this fueling process. There are also independent providers at the airport, for example. I guess there's people that are only providing fuel. Some other people are just doing maybe storage, also doing the refueling on the ground. And that, I guess, it really depends on the market, right? So you have some airports where there's more competition. Some other airports there's less competition. Is it that way?
That's how it works. And it actually depends a lot on the regulatory environment and historical reasons. I mean, there are reasons why some parts of the world you tend to see more monopolies and more vertical integration, and in other parts of the world you see more competition. In general, in IATA, I mean, the ultimate objective is to have sustainable business for everyone, basically, and mostly the airlines, and that usually means lower prices or prices that will allow for continuity of business of airlines and all suppliers. We tend to think that it works best when there's competition because it takes less regulation. But everything works. I mean, there are certain conditions where you could see certain benefits from having a monopoly and such. But in general, we are more pro-competition. And the ultimate goal, and I'm going to read this because I have our mission statement as fuel buyers for airlines, right? So our goal is to have clean, dry, and on-specification fuel at a cost that's reasonable, basically.
Because what's the involvement between IATA and the fuel company? So you mentioned, for example, Yulia mentioned Gazpromneft-aero works with IATA. How is this relationship structured? So you are an international organization that sets a number of standards, but what are the specific initiatives where you work together with the airlines and the oil suppliers? I guess, for example, one of them is fuel standards. So the fuel data standards group, for example.
So I'll go from the more general to the more specific, and that's when we'll get to the FDSG work. But so IATA is a trade association which works for airlines. So our main objective is to have a sustainable and thriving aviation industry and airline industry. With that in mind, we collaborate with other stakeholders. So IATA has within its membership, it's only airlines. but there's a strategic partnership program through which we collaborate with other stakeholders along the supply chain for airlines. Fuel suppliers are part of that. And we collaborate with them because we realize that collaboration is the way through which you get better results and better conditions for all involved in a certain market. That's certainly the case for airlines. So when it comes to aviation fuel, we have the Aviation Fuel Forum and different instances where fuel suppliers and fuel buyers and other service providers that also work within the fuel area. So in technical issues, or suppliers of material and services and others, we provide a forum for people to meet. And then we have the Fuel Data Standards Group, which is also something that's within IATA's governance. So we have airlines there, but we also have fuel suppliers and IT service providers and others who collaborate to develop, which ultimately is a language through which all these stakeholders can communicate. So we have a set of standards which are based on XML language, through which all people involved in the supply chain can communicate.
Yeah, actually, if I can make a pause here, I've been doing some research ahead of this conversation today and read a little bit about the work you guys do. And if I understood it correctly, because I'm not an expert in this topic, is a way to make the communication between all the counterparties involved in this value chain more agile, to simplify all the paperwork basically that involved in the fueling process. You make sure that you all speak the same language, put it in plain words. Why this happens now in 2020? I mean, what was the process like until now? Is it so complicated that you had to design a whole new way of doing things because there's so much paperwork involved in this?
All right, I guess I can start. Again, as we were saying, it's a really complex kind of like life cycle for fuel. So you have, since you have more than one supplier, usually for different airports, or there's a negotiation process that takes place first, right? So there's a tender bid process, which is already very, very work intensive, and there's lots of communications going back and forth. So right now, I guess the current status of things is that people send proposals in an email, and then they attach PDF files and or XML files, which then have to get compared and such, right? So that's a partial digitalization. It used to be that you would send a mail containing your offer, and there's printed material and everything. That's the start, and that happens usually like once a year. But then you have all the operational part of it, which is the period that starts maybe like 2 days before the flight. There's a communication that happens between the airline and other stakeholders, not only fuel suppliers, but the airports and ground handlers and others. And then you have to have a transaction, a paper or something that supports that fueling. And then at the end, you have the invoicing, and everything contains paper and such. So digitalizing has helped, expedite the process. But then you initially, I'm saying 20 years ago, or even before that, you would have suppliers or service providers that would come with their own proprietary systems, and then you can't really talk to anyone else outside of that and such. So that's when the fuel data standards came in, because they're a common language which allows communication in an agnostic manner, I think, through which different systems and people behind those systems can communicate and exchange information.
So it's mainly about the paperwork. The sort of information it gets exchanged here is transactional. Things like how much fuel goes into that plane, how much is the cost of that. So if I understood correctly here, there's two levels of interaction. You might have an airline and a fuel supplier might have a sort of general agreements on the supply, which I guess involves certain conditions, certain covenants, etc., etc. And then at the more tactical level, then you have the actual implementation of that. So when a plane is refueled, when the fuel is delivered on the tarmac, etc. So all this flow of information and these standards cover all aspects of this relationship between the different counterparties.
Yes, so you are exactly right. We have the commercial and technical parts, which is normally has this, the head office is located in one city, and the company has different fuel stops at the airports, and so you have to take all the information from the airport and to get it into the office and then distribute among your customers. So that's why it takes a lot of time. First of all, it takes sometimes it has human mistakes, and you have to control everything to check accurately because in the end of the day, it comes into the airlines or suppliers' losses if you don't control everything correctly. That's why. So as for us, I guess that having started our business in 2007 and starting our business with international airlines at 2012, it was the first time when I heard about XML standards, when Lufthansa called me and said, okay, do you work with XML invoices? And I was like, what's that? And then I was in the know. Then I took some information on the internet, and I found that there is an IATA standard for the document like invoice. So invoices everywhere, they are all different. I know this because I work with international suppliers all over the world, and I can tell you that there are so many different formats that each and every company has set up in their own city or country, and how they normally work with the clients. And when you have to take all these papers, I can understand the airline, they have different type of papers which mean one and the same thing, which mean the fact of the fuel supplied into plane, but different types of and formats of these papers they have to put into their system so that they could distribute a payment to the supplier. So it takes time. The airline has to sometimes double check the information, and this all happens because there is no one language, formatted language to distribute and to exchange this type of information. And IATA did a really great job to somehow take all these formats of different types of invoices and put it into one standard. So this invoice standard was one of the first standards, and it is the most successful, I guess, among the rest, because the rest are more younger than the invoice standard, XML standard. So when we started to distribute XML invoices, I can say that we really had a time economy for 6 to 10 minutes per one document, and there are millions of such documents, and we had a really great human economy on just working with the documents, and it's really great. After that, when we started to implement the XML invoices in our company according to the IATA standards, then started to see how they work in Russia and what could be even more done to make those standards be more applicable in Russia. And so we took an initiative, and we entered our FDSG, IATA FDSG working group, and came with some initiatives in order to to make these standards more applicable in Russia, just to
because Russia
solve some.
Was very different from other countries in that regard.
I wouldn't say that it was different. All the countries are really different. Even in Europe, different standards of the document format. They really differ. So, and just knowing these peculiarities of the country helps our group, our working group, to fit the standards into the realities of these or those region where the document is used and is applied. So this helped us as a Russian company to fit this standard into our Russian realities and to distribute this electronic invoicing into among our clients. And we are now really happy. They are happy, and it's really great that we can satisfy those requirements and cut our expenses and our human resources, and to involve those resources into a more complicated tasks, not just looking at the documents and check if everything is correct or not.
Yeah, because I'm thinking here, when you are driving and you need to put fuel in your car, you just go to a petrol station and you take the credit card or cash and you pay on the spot. That many liters, that much money, that's the price, that's it. So in case of aviation, so if you have one plane flying from one country to another, how do the people at the airport where it needs to be refueled know, it's going to come this plane and it's going to be there between this time and this time and it's to get that much fuel and it's going to cost that much money? So how does this in practice work? So the airline should tell in advance, I guess, the fuel company, and the fuel company would tell the people at the airport that they need to refuel that plane at that time and put that much fuel. And then who pays that? I mean, is it paid in advance, or is the people at the airport, the whole process goes the other way around. So people at the airport say, hey, we refueled this plane for that much. And then it goes to the headquarters, and from the headquarters sends an invoice to the airline. So is it how it works, more or less?
So
I guess not. There's no credit card. The pilot goes there and
oh, there are.
Yeah, there are.
Oh, there are.
Yeah.
That's not what's used by most commercial airlines, but there are fuel suppliers, and I'm pretty sure Gazprom also does this, that issue their own credit cards. They could be like co-branded with banks and such, but that's actually something that happens. But let's go to your question and maybe address it from the end point and go from there to the back.
Trying to get an idea of the practical implementation of all this transactional information flow. So to better understand how you guys are implementing this at a practical level.
So the captain, when there's a flight, he has to, the top priority for every airline in the world is safety. So if you want to get from point A to point B in a certain type of aircraft with a certain payload, you need a specific amount of fuel. That could be at least that, or could be more if you want to be safe because of, there's going to be like some uncertainties in the weather and where you're going to be going to and such, right? So how much fuel will get uploaded or uplifted is decided by the captain there, right? How do they communicate that to the person who's going to perform the actual uplift? Usually and traditionally what happens is there's a dialogue, like a face-to-face dialogue. And it ends when that person who performed the uplift goes and shows a paper to the captain and tells them, look, this is how much I uplifted, sign here. And they would sign and go back. Now that triggers a whole process.
Sorry, can you define the concept of uplift for the people that are not familiarized with this?
Okay, so a person goes with a hose, which they will connect to could be a different device, right? Could be a refueler. It depends on, whether there's going to be a truck with actual fuel in it, or you will connect to the hydrant. There's a pit, and then connect it. And then the fuel goes from there into the plane.
Okay, so it's the actual action of physically putting the hose into the
aircraft. Yes.
Okay, filling the tank. Okay, good. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No problem. So, and then that triggers the whole payment process, right? So you could, when you negotiate with, as a fuel buyer, you negotiate with the supplier payment terms. So you can go to prepay or you can have credit. And then there is a certain period with which you would be invoiced. So maybe all the uplifts from this week will be invoiced by the end of the week, and then the airline will have 14 or 28 or whatever days to pay, unless they've been already paid in a prepaid, agreement. But that's basically how it works. And of course, there's things to consider in there as, fuel density and specifications. So usually the specification relates to where you are uplifting fuel, right? So in Russia, you have a specification, you have another specification in the US, for the most part equivalent, but then you will have differences as to, usually it's freeze point. So if you're going to have a transport flight, you need a fuel that's going to freeze at a lower temperature than if you're flying, from the Caribbean to South Africa, right?
So it's like a petrol station. You might have this 95 octane or 98 octane.
That's different grades for a specification. But again, I'm the commercial guy here, so maybe if one of my technical colleagues listens to this,
okay,
say like, this guy's talking. But usually you have different specifications, and within that you have grades. Like you have Jet A, Jet A1,
or TS1 in Russia.
Yeah.
Okay. So based on this agreement, then they put one type of fuel or another into the plane.
Usually you're going to have only one specification and grade at each airport, and that's defined in your contract, which is part of the tender bid process.
So, and then what you're doing is digitalizing this flow of paper. As Yulia said, that involves a huge amount of savings for the processing resources that you need to deploy to get all this system working.
Yeah, it also concerns not only the commercial part, it also concerns the part with the fueling requests. As Daniel said, that pilot says the final quantity, but before that the airline sends a fueling request for 1 year, for instance, or for 1 month, or 1 week, with the schedule saying, okay, I have these kind of flights here, and you should fuel all these flights on the airline account. So we are, as a supplier, we nominate this fuel request to the fueling farm people who are scheduling their job on the apron. They know that they have different flights of different airlines that should be covered by this supplier in this airport, and they know that they would need 2 or 3 trucks for this time, or 5 trucks for that time, and they're planning their job on the apron. So when you have, especially right now, when you have lots of scheduled flights, when the passenger airline becomes a cargo airline, the COVID realities. So the flights, they can occur very unexpectedly, and in order to be ready to refuel them, because they have also the timing, especially I can show you an example. In the Siberian region, we had this very huge amount of cargo flights that were flying from Europe to Asia, from Asia to Europe, and they were using the Siberian airports as the technical stops for refueling. So what does it mean? That the airplane arrives in the Novosibirsk airport, for instance, and ask for fuel, and it means that the people who are working there, they should be really very fast, because the only thing the airline needs right now is just the fuel. So there is no time for anything else. And in this case, the instant nomination of the airline with the fueling request, which is sent by means of digital transportation, like by means of, for instance, IATA XML standard, operational standards, where the airline sends several different requests in different timing, prior to the day of refueling, on the day of refueling, when the airplane is in the air, they send the corrected amount of fuel that they would need, and the final on the apron in the airport, they send the final fuel request with the final amount of fuel that they would need at this time, depending on the weather and the commercial cargo and other things that really affect the amount of fuel they would need. And in this case, the fuel operator in the airport already knows how much they would need, and they wouldn't be put in such a situation when there will be just one truck ready to refuel, but the airline would need 2 trucks, because this is the main reason why you can just go to the fuel gas station and refuel your car very easily. And with the airline, they need tons, not liters. They need a lot of fuel, so you can just do it with 1 truck or 2 trucks, for instance. And that's why you need to be warned beforehand how much fuel they would need, and you should be ready within the very short time to refuel the airline. So that's how the standards work. They really work, and they are very effective in such situations, especially.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking that you can do a planning beforehand, but then, I mean, the plane has tailwinds or headwinds or whatever, and might differ the final quantity. So how fast is this automated communication? Well, not automated, not real time, but it's pretty fast, right? So all this flow of information, it keeps updating as soon as the airport lands, when the aircraft lands, aircraft is in the air. So you can be adjusting it different times during
you would expect, right? You would expect that that's how it works, and it's automated and everything. So I started in the aviation fuel area about like 15 years ago, and then I did other stuff within the airline world, and then I'm back in fuel since 2 years ago with IATA. And then I said, okay, so maybe the world has changed, since 15 years ago and today, right? And things I was expecting, like communication like instant and all automated and everything. That's hardly the case. I mean, with the exception of a few airlines which have done a great job, and also a few suppliers, and Gazprom is one of them, digitalizing and having digital support to the operation. The reality for most of the world is not that. You would see that some of the communications in operations between airlines and airports are based on teletype. Today, 2020, which is a technology that was developed and in use since the 1970s, right? And it's being used currently. And I'm not saying I'm from Chile, which is like in the bottom of Latin America. I'm not saying there, I'm saying like here, right? So you would expect for digitalization to have gone a longer way than it has. And especially with aviation, because aviation is supposed to be, the fact of that, you can lift people off the ground requires lots of technology. So you would expect airlines to be at the forefront of all innovation, and that's hardly the case for the majority of the airlines in fuel suppliers, let's say. So again, I remember, to address your question before, if I received an invoice and I see a problem with the invoice, when I was in an airline 15 years ago, what I would do is I would take the invoice printed, go to a place where we would be saving all the flight logs, right? Which had to be saved there for compliance purposes, for matters of security and safety and others. So you would have this huge warehouse with lots of, flight logs. And I would go and have to compare what was signed by the captain at that airport on that day and such with the invoice I received. And that would facilitate reconciliation of the invoice, which is a process that goes after you receive the invoice. And that, if you're digitalized and you have integrated your systems, is instant. Like you just, let the systems work and tell you whether the invoice is correct or not. But in a vast majority of airlines today, there's lots of paperwork and things going behind the scenes that takes place for an invoice to get paid.
And the actual implementation of the software that needs to process these standards, is this done through something that has been developed by IATA, or is it something that each, for example, Gazpromneft has its own application developed for this, or is there an ecosystem of, for example, I'm thinking now there's another IATA initiative, NDC, it's in the booking area, It's completely different. And there's a whole ecosystem of companies that are developing applications and systems to handle this type of standards. I don't know if it's the same case here.
So I'll start with the general, and maybe Yulia can then go and tell us what's Gazprom's reality. But you don't need to have IATA XML standards implemented in order to do things digitally. You can do it on your own standalone system and such. What the IATA standards enable are communications that when you want to, let me take a step back here. You have a system and you want that system to interact with other systems. And if they speak a common language, then implementation is very quick and easy and painless, right? So if you have a common language to communicate, then maybe you're an airline, you support the operational standard, and you want to connect to a fuel supplier that provides fuel at an airport where you're not currently flying. You want to start flying there. And instead of going through this whole painful process of implementation and talking to them, which for any IT developer there, it's going to take weeks or months even. If you speak the same language and you both have systems in place that can intercommunicate, then it's just switching on it's a switch. You turn the switch on, and that's it. Again, I think a more direct way of answering your question. Do you need the standards to digitalize? No. And you can implement your systems. But if you are implementing things that are compliant to a standard, then whatever you want to bring online later is going to be much easier. You just have to switch things on and off.
But I guess there must be some interfaces there involved. So to be able to
we have
to manage this flow at each end.
We have IT service providers that work with us in the FDSG, and you can go and buy an off-the-shelf solution with them, and that will make your life much easier. But you can also develop in-house. So, another thing that we are doing in the FDSG, because the standards have been developed already. So our function now as a group is to maintain them, right? So there are some new things coming up, and then we have to incorporate those into the existing standards. That's maintenance work. Okay. But we're also developing implementation guides to make it easier for companies that want to develop things in-house to just take the manual, see examples, and implement. And I don't know, I don't really know the reality in Gazprom. They may have developed their own in-house things. And actually, I think they have a really good team of people developing things, and they have been working a lot. But there are other suppliers who have implemented with others.
Yeah, I can add that, yes, exactly. We have our own in-house solutions for this. We have a very strong digital team in the back office, which works for developing our digital initiatives. So, for example, we have an instant data exchange system, which is a hardware, but with the help of IATA XML standards, we can instantly send the data after the fueling is done. We can instantly send this information to the airline, so the airline can have it in the system. We just need to have the same language speaking. So most of the biggest airlines speak IATA XML language, so it's easy for us to exchange the information with them. So we also have this invoicing standards in place. We're working with all the Russian airlines on this standard, and of course the international too. And we also have developed the tender with standard within our company, and we had gone through the POC within IATA working group sessions and workshops. We had a POC with many international airlines already. We have proved that this tender process works with the help of our in-house solution. So and also data exchange on the apron. We had in 2018 2019, we had a POC with Air France for this standard operational standard, which also works in our company. And we even exchanged information for the bulk movement inside between the storage tanks with the help of the IATA standard. So it's really helpful, and it's really international language for the data exchange, and we're happy to have it in our in-house solutions for software. This really helps to save time and to be open for the other airlines and our partners outside of Russia to have this common digital language in place.
Very good. And the inevitable question is, how does this very weird, unusual, extraordinary situation we are living in the industry affected the rollout, implementation of these standards? Has this somehow affected you in when it comes to implementing it, or the opposite? Maybe because it's like everything that moves in the direction of digitalization, maybe it's been accelerated by this pandemic situation. What's the situation?
So it's a very interesting time right now regarding digitalization. There's definitely more demand, and people actually realize the benefits right now, and it's a very basic reason why. Everything that involves paper involves different people touching the same sheet of paper, which is a vector for contagion, right? So you can get infected by touching the same piece of paper that someone that is infected touched. So yeah, I was describing the process through which the person who performs the uplift goes to the cabin, to the cockpit, and then gets a signature with a ball pen from the captain. There's risk there, and that's not happening now. Fortunately, there are procedures in place through which you can avoid that. One of them is digitalization, right? But then, unfortunately, you have some jurisdictions where that digital signature, is not valid from a fiscal point of view, for instance. So that's a challenge. And Yulia was mentioning that even within Europe, you have different countries having different approaches to digital signatures. So yeah, there's increased demand, but everything that means implementation means cost, and no one has a cent to spend on things that are not vital to the operation right now, especially airlines. So airlines are forced to let people go in these current times, right? And of course, they're not looking into anything that's not vital to their operation. So we actually had, and I think Yulia may have mentioned it, a very interesting project to develop an industry hub in IATA, through which airlines and other stakeholders like fuel suppliers and into-plane service providers could communicate and exchange information, which would enable what I was telling you before, that you can just switch on a supplier in a certain airport. It was a great project with lots of support from the industry, but down came COVID-19 and everything was put on hold. Yeah. So we've been impacted both ways. Lots of interest, but no money to support that interest.
I guess it's one of those cases where you might have a long-term saving, but it requires some investment at the beginning, and that might make it complicated when.
That's the funny thing, because the payback is not going to be that long-term. It's quite quick, but you don't have money to spend. So even if you're going to get your money back and actually save lots of money really quickly, you can't afford to spend any cent.
And I guess people working from home as well, it makes things slower.
Well, actually, I can say from myself, I'm like 1/3 of workers in my company were put on remote working places. So we worked remotely from home. We didn't see any, troubles with that because, of course, a personal connection is very important, but when it is dangerous, it's better to stay home. And the modern digital solutions, they help to make no changes to the process when you work from home remotely. So, and once, it's interesting because once I came back from the remote home work, I came to the office, and here I had to take my temperature every 4 hours, and I had to. We are taking COVID tests regularly, and all the workers are under the antivirus program, are under very good support from our company, because the company's employees, they work on the apron and each and every shift, and the number of people, it should be, it should be same and as planned, because it affects the work on the apron with the airlines and the airport infrastructure itself. So it's very important to stay healthy. And that's why I really felt the importance of being of staying in the team, healthy and safe after during this COVID crisis times. In this crisis, especially in our company, we understood that in this crisis we should think into the digital questions more thoroughly. We have our plans to somehow approach the internal processes to make them more digital oriented, more easy to have this, paperless work, to enable it on all fuel stations. Now we can have it in Sheremetyevo airport, and we are thinking of exporting this solution into all the fueling farms of our friends. So it really was a trigger for the digital revolution, I should say.
And going forward, with pandemic or without, what's the perspective for this standard? Which targets do you have in a long-term perspective? How do you plan to popularize these standards?
These days, long-term means in 2 months, right? I mean...
Sort of, yeah. In terms of uncertainty, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very uncertain times for the airlines in general, I think. So we are seeing massive hits in terms of personnel and resources in general. So it's going to have a mixed effect, I think. I think at every level in the organizations, everyone is well aware now that digitalization is possible and needed. So that's the only way to go. So eventually we'll get there, and I think this may catalyze, implementation and digitalization and such. But to do that, we will need a workforce in place, and I think it's going to take some time to rebuild all the foundations in many of the airlines. And this is a part of the business, but I think this crisis came to reshape the industry, the aviation industry as a whole. So it's very hard to tell what's going to happen. Digitalization is going to happen because that's where the world is going, and where it's been going for the last 20 years already. So I told you, I'm surprised that we are lagging back so badly. But eventually we'll get there, and I think how quickly it'll happen will largely depend on how strong airlines are and how quickly we'll get the resources that we need to implement all these things.
Yes, we also think that we have to do something with the crisis. Should teach us some lessons that we should take a note of. And but we think that being in the avant-garde of these changes, we would become some kind of enlightener of the digital philosophy in the industry, and we guess that it would help to make the fuel process not more complicated as to buy fuel would be not more complicated as to buy a cup of coffee in the airport. That's our aim.
Okay.
To make it not that complicated in terms of relationship between the supplier and the airline. Of course, the part of the quality and following the standards would be the same, but the cooperation and means of cooperation, the solutions that we are going to develop really help us to achieve such an aim, to make it simple.
Very well. So yeah, I think we can maybe leave it here for today, and I think it's been a very comprehensive roundup of this very interesting initiative. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more in the near future. As you said, digitalization continues unabated and becomes a norm, even in those very legacy processes that are now still being transformed in our day. So where can people find out more about these standards? Is there an IATA website where they can check this information?
Yes, but the address is quite complicated. So
Okay.
I would invite people to use our good friend Google and type IATA,
Yes.
and then FDSG
Or check the
data standards.
Or check the podcast notes where I'm gonna post the corresponding links so that they can find all the reference information.
That's great.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been very interesting having you here today and learning about this so important area of the aviation industry, but it's normally out of sight because you arrive to the airport, you board, you disembark, but you don't really get to see all the different processes that are moving at the same time to make sure that the plane gets refueled and ready for the next flight. So yeah, something that's always interesting to learn about. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And one more thing before you go. Remember, you can subscribe to the Allplane podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and many other platforms. If you like this podcast, please do not hesitate to give it a good rating or to recommend it to a friend. See you soon.